Hello, brothers and sisters. So excited to have our 6th episode of Future of Faith. My co-host, Will Archer, will not be able to participate this morning, but we're certainly tied together talking about planning for this session. And with me today, I have some brothers and sisters who it's such an honor to be with. These are men and women who are leading some large churches in North America. And I'd like to take a little bit of time just to introduce each one of them. On my left is Kevin Miller. He leads the Boston church with his wife, Melissa, for the last 7 months. Next to him is a very close friend of Kevin's, Chris Zillman, who is here in Denver. And both he and his wife, Megan, have been here for about 1.5 years. They were in Chicago with the Arnesons, but they decided, you know what, it's time to
get
invest
out
in a large church. Amen.
Freedom.
Then, a little bit south here in Denver, we have Kit with her husband Chester. They lead the Colorado Springs for the last 7 years. Great story, as they all do. And then lastly, for today's session, we have A.T. and Marcy. Great friends of Patty and I have been in Chicago many years, but have been leading it with a great team of men and women in the Chicago church. So it's such an honor for me to participate with these guys and really discuss about how to build faith, what's the future of faith in North America moving forward. And we thought how we would start this session off is give these participants an opportunity maybe to share a crazy story, something memorable, something that happened to them over the years as they're developing how to lead or were leading. So let's open it up here for a second.
Awesome.
Well, we'll jump in, and we're going to start with a story that is the earliest crazy story of our introduction into public speaking, we'll call it.
That's true.
Mars, do you want to share it?
Yeah, we were probably about, 3 months old as Christians?
Yeah.
And we were so excited. We were converted in the Milwaukee Church of Christ, and we were just so excited. And we were honored to be asked to do communion one day. And so it was a Sunday morning. A.T. and I were going to get up, and we were so nervous. We had never spoken in front of a group like this before. There was probably 300 people. So we walk out to the podium, and A.T. does this amazing communion, and I'm just standing.
It was amazing.
I'm standing right next to him, kind of, getting ready to share what I'm going to share. And he goes through his thing, and then he gets done, and then he closes his Bible, and he walks off. And I'm standing there, and I just walked off with him. And,
That's how I roll. It's an entourage.
I just kind of look like, hey, I'm with him, And but yeah, he totally forgot to introduce me. Totally forgot to have me share. And I just, But that was the beginning days. We were just so excited though to be there, and it was just this funny memory we have of starting off.
It's surprising that you would freeze like that in front of the crowd when you both have so much experience as cheerleaders together.
That's right. Hey, do we have a graphic on that?
Do we have a picture for his cheerleading?
It's definitely somewhere.
Right.
I remember when I was about 6 months, maybe a year old spiritually, and I was a Bible talk leader in a campus ministry out in Western Massachusetts. There was an all Boston church family group leaders meeting being run by Randy McKean, who I didn't know. I was crazy, fresh out of the world. And I remember Randy was preaching this lesson about courage and evangelism, and he was like, talking about how we need to share our faith. And I was just like, yeah. And he was like, we need to be courageous. That's right. And then he started telling this story about how he went into like a 7-Eleven and thought to share his faith and then wimped out. And he's going, I went in this 7-Eleven and I thought I should share my faith. And I'm loud, I'm going, yes. And he's like, and everybody's kind of doing this. And I was like in the church, I grew up in a much more conservative, socially church, so no one ever spoke or did anything. So I loved it. I was like, oh yeah, I'm finally home. And he's going, I was going to share my faith. Yes. And I went up to the counter. All right. And he goes, and then I wimped out like a coward. And I go, yup. And I'm the only one in the audience that says that. And Randy stops the whole thing. And he goes, and he looks and he goes, thanks, brother. And everybody in my campus ministry is like moving away from me. And I'm like, this is how it all went down. I had a good 7 months in the Lord, and now it's over.
It's over.
Yep.
Well, Kevin and I, we were roommates in college.
Wow.
And so we lived together, for years in the campus ministry. And one summer, we'd kind of made this vow to one another that we were going to get up early every morning
Radical.
in order to, have our quiet times. We had to be at work at probably 7:30. We both were moving furniture together on campus, and so we had to get up at like 5:36 to have a quiet time, which, for a lot of human beings that's normal, but for us that was pretty radical. And so, but we weren't good at waking up, and so we made a vow. We said, if we wake up late, if we snooze, we're fasting that day. Like, we can't eat that day.
Yes.
All right, and so, but if the next day we got up on time, we could eat. But then on the third day, if you snoozed again, you had to fast for 2 days. Just to stop us from the up and down.
Lost a lot of weight that summer.
Exactly.
A lot of
I just
motivation.
remember by the end of the summer, one day I came home, and I had gotten up on time, and I came home, and Kevin was at the refrigerator drinking a jar of tomato paste.
As long as you can drink it, it's not food. Of course, that's liquid.
Kevin lost a lot of weight that summer. I would
That's
say.
awesome.
That's awesome.
Nice. Those are great stories.
Yep.
So let's dive into the early years. What was the early years like for you? I know many of us have been disciples, 20, 30 years, maybe longer. Campus ministry, singles, how we got baptized, but then just seeing the need, that heart to love people, to engage people, a lost world. And then going into the ministry, now you're all church leaders working together. The early years, what was it like? What were some of the things maybe you went through or felt growing up?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, Marcy and I, it's funny, our conversion story is linked to kind of the vibe of the fellowship at that time, back in 1991, was it? Yeah, 92. We went out to a mall one night, and we were pushing our newborn daughter around in a mall and trying to get her to calm down, and we were standing under the hue of the Radio Shack lights, the beautiful red hue of the Radio Shack lights, and the mall was closing, and we were about to just go out to our car when this couple pushed their baby up to us, their stroller up to us, and they shared their faith with us. And that was the beginning of our journey. It was just this incredible kind of interaction, and they were super kind. They didn't actually invite us to church. They just asked us, do you guys live around here? And super kind, super loving, and it was really cool. We walked out of the mall that night thinking, that's the way the world should be. We just moved to Milwaukee from Iowa, and we just thought people should engage one another. People should love one another. What we didn't know is that group had a Bible talk meeting that night, and they didn't have any visitors, so they went to the mall to share their faith. And so that was what we were converted into. That Bible talk was our first Bible talk, and we were in that Bible talk for 3 months, then we moved to a different part of the city, but the whole vibe for us in the very beginning was this sense of, we're gonna change the world.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're gonna, that became a regular part of who we were, and it was just really, really powerful. We're really grateful for that kind of beginning DNA spiritually in us.
I remember telling her, I was like, you're a godsend. And she told me later, she goes, you don't know how much those words meant to me when we were talking to you.
Wow.
And then, 3 weeks later, we decided to make Jesus the Lord of our lives. And we went forwards, 29 years ago now.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah, earlier days bring a lot of just emotions when I think about it. I remember in 1988, I was converted in New York, and as a very young Christian, I was asked to be sent out to Manila, Philippines. And I remember we were just 28, and we were just sharing anything that moves. And our first month, we saw 100 people get baptized.
Wow.
And the first year, we saw 400 people get baptized. But it seemed so abrupt, and yet it was so natural. It was the way of life. That's the only life we knew at that time, is to share your faith to anybody. And we're having our own jobs, but we were having 3-4 studies a day. That's how it worked. But I think God just led us, and we just followed. Those were the days, and I think nowadays we're trying to even bring that out, and it's amazing to just look back and say, God moves so powerfully.
Yeah,
And
that's awesome.
we worship the same God, and God's going to do the same thing.
When I grew up in a traditional campus ministry, with all the stories of sharing your faith and the conversions and the friendships that you build that you look back on now, and you're just so grateful for those times. But another part of it was, I was a part of the Boston church, and Boston was sending out mission teams to Europe every 4 months. And I remember my girlfriend, who's my wife now, we would sneak into those into those mission meetings. We applied for every mission team we could. even though we were still in college, and they would ask us to stand up and answer questions. And this is how Randy McKean, who was leading the church at the time, got to know us, as us sneaking into these meetings and hoping and applying to go on these. And of course, they never chose us. Like we applied for like 8 of these mission teams. And
Wow.
But
I remember that.
that's how he. But that's how I got to know him, and that's how in the end we went in the ministry is through doing that. But there was just this sense that there are people giving up their lives, taking their families, selling everything to go overseas. And as a campus student, while I was involved in this campus culture, I was seeing even outside of that culture a church that believed that the world needed to be saved, and that we're doing radical things all around me, not just within the campus ministry, but every phase of ministry within the church.
I remember Chip Mitchell, our campus minister, would tell me, Chris went to another meeting. He wants to drop out of school to go on a mission team. And we would laugh about him, and I'd say, man, he should get his degree first. But the guy that shared his faith with my brother, my older brother Steve, my brother was baptized, and 2 weeks later I was baptized. And the guy that shared his faith with Steve was this brother named Eric Kleinschmidt, and he was this super introverted, very quiet, not the personality, lead. And he had been on the mission team to Springfield, Mass. And he'd been there for 3 years, had never met anyone that became a Christian. He was moving back to Boston that month to get married, and he was in a CVS, and he had always been sharing his faith. And he shared his faith with my brother, and then my brother was baptized, I was baptized mom and dad, baptized my sister,
cool. Wow.
baptized, now 2 of my brother's kids are baptized, 2 of my kids are baptized, 3 of my mom's sisters are baptized. It's just like my niece, my cousin's been baptized, her boyfriend. 14 souls have been baptized from that one quiet guy.
Isn't that amazing?
That was sharing faith. And that's what we were baptized. That's what I came into, right? I was baptized in the singles, and then in 3 months I was in the campus ministry soon to be with Chris once he was converted. But it was just share your faith with everything.
Yes.
No one was making me do it.
Yeah.
But the
That's
idea
right.
that I had these Bible studies and that people's lives would change and I could do that, and then I was going to do it. I remember I would sit down with Chip Mitchell, who was our campus minister. Yep. He leads the Philadelphia church now. He's just a total wild man, and which we loved, But
awesome.
I would sit with him all day. Skip classes. No, but sometimes. Sometimes I did.
Tell the truth.
But he would study the Bible with people, and he would change them, and you could see how he was using the word to help. And I just thought, if I could ever learn that.
Wow.
And that's what it was like. It was just like, I remember the day that they made the announcement. There was this all New England announcement asking, our senior year of college, asking for people to raise their contribution because they wanted to put young people in New England in the ministry.
That's cool.
And I remember at the leaders meeting, Chris and I looked at each other. I still remember, and we were like, that's awesome, man.
Do you guys remember your first leaders meeting? Remember back when it was like, I got invited to the leaders meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Totally.
The first leaders meeting we went to, Kevin Maines, Kevin and Mary led the church in Milwaukee.
yeah.
They invited us to the leaders meeting. They sat us in the front row.
Yeah.
And back then, Kevin, it's kind of a funny joke Kevin led everything. Like, I laugh, was he disorganized or was he just really good at everything? but he did the opening song, then he did the devotional.
Wow. Wow.
He did it all. But he did the song, you guys know the song, Well, I Woke Up This Morning with My Mind.
yeah.
And the whole crowd goes, Where was your mind? Centered on Jesus.
That's right.
And he came down and he grabbed my face. And he goes,
This is
Where
getting
was
good.
your mind? And I'm like, centered on Jesus. You know what I mean? It was just this it was just everything was so.
So it's a real awkward church. Is what you're saying. It's an awkward
No, but
atmosphere.
it was funny. It was like, I'm at the leaders meeting, but the ice was broken in that moment. And
That's
you're just
right.
kind of like,
Oh, and
whoa.
we would just dream about doing ministry. Not as a career, but the idea that we would get to spend all
right.
of our time
That's right.
teaching and sharing our faith, and we roomed together, and we would just stay up late talking about it. Like just one day, maybe you'll go to Rome and I'll go to Barcelona or whatever. We'd have all these dreams of doing it, and we'd laid into the night. And there'd be some nights it'd be like 2 or 3 in the morning at this point, and it was time to go to sleep. And Kevin he'd whisper, he'd go, "Hey, Chris," but I'd pretend to be asleep at this point because I was done talking to him, and he'd just go, "Chris, what? Kevin, what?" hey, whose side are you fighting on?
I wanted to know.
That's all right, Kevin, I'm not playing with you. I'm not doing this. No, Chris, just seriously, whose side are you fighting on? I'm fighting on the Lord's side. And then he'd get up on his bed and go, I'm fighting on the Lord's side. Just go on. But we would just stay up late dreaming about it. And it wasn't a career. We didn't think about it as a
So
career,
you
but
were in the
as a
same
mission.
household?
Oh, yeah, we'd
Like
sing
a brother's
college.
house?
The first person I saw baptized
Yeah.
was his wife, girlfriend. And he was on the phone in Indiana, kind of studying the Bible now.
Kinda.
And we were all like, when is she going to dump this non-Christian? and then 4 months later, he had gotten baptized and transferred and came to school.
Nice.
Wow.
And I remember the night I met him. He walked in. I was still a young Christian. He walked into the brother's household. I didn't live there. I was just there, and we stayed up. I think until like 5 a.m.
Yep.
That very first night, just
That's
talking
so
about
awesome.
changing the world.
You know,
I
I
remem-
think.
oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. I think about all those great news. It was amazing experiencing all those things. But I was on the other side of the globe in the Philippines, in
Yeah.
Manila, and I remember our
How many
team-
years? What year did you come back from the Philippines?
I came back here in 2004.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I was converted here and then joined the mission planting in Manila in 1989.
Wow.
And Chester was not my husband yet.
You
at
were
that time.
baptized in 89.
88.
88.
And
So
89
1 year
was the
later,
church planting,
you
yeah.
went to Manila.
Actually, less than a year later. And so
That's amazing.
our campus there is an equivalent of the teens here. I'm telling you, there's a lot of persecution. And I remember different times, so we would go to church and the sister would come with shaved head because their parents were not happy with the conversion.
Wow.
And we would hear stories where some sisters and brothers are chained into chair or table and they couldn't go to church. And there's just a lot of persecution happening. I remember Chester and I were leading in one of the campuses there, and we would see a truck or a jeep in front of our house with guys with Armalites or big guns because they're threatening us.
Wow.
So we have so much joy doing it. We didn't care.
Yeah.
In the midst of persecution, the joy just overpowers the persecution that we're going through. But it's just amazing. We would
great.
not baptize anybody who would not talk to their parents because, of course, they're underage. And yet, as they became, so passionate
Wow.
about Christianity, they get persecuted. And so there's a lot of that.
And
but-
you were 1, 2, 3 years old spiritually.
Yes.
4 years old with all this
Yes.
going on.
That's
And
amazing.
but one thing though, earlier days, again in the Philippines, we had witchcraft over there, and we had a lot of stuff going on. And I remember studying about with somebody, a woman who was possessed. Okay, don't laugh at me now. Okay,
I'm not laughing. I didn't laugh.
4 guys could not even, maybe 3, could not even hold her down.
Wow.
Wow.
And while I was studying the Bible with her, and she was like, and it was kind of scary, but
Yeah,
man, we didn't
that's
care.
scary.
I mean, the Spirit of God just moving powerfully, and
You're
it's
just
like
leaning into the mission, right? It's just
exactly.
like,
So
yeah,
those were the
gosh.
early years. Is the spiritual battle was so real, but there's just a lot of joy just seeing people's lives change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
think
remember
that's
I
the
was
joy.
talking to this woman.
amazing.
It made me think about, and I was maybe like 2 months old in the Lord, and I was so excited. And I was in the parking lot at a grocery store, and I was just sharing my faith with her. I'm like, "Do you know about Jesus? Do you know about God?" And she goes, "Are you a young Christian?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I could tell." She goes, "Just wait, this is going to wear off." And those words to this day
Yeah.
just motivate me.
It
That's
will not
right.
wear
It's not
off.
gonna wear
That's
off.
right.
I'm fired up,
Seriously.
But you're
Better.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets
So,
better.
so we're going to talk about big church leadership here in a second, but let me go back. Just one more thing about the early years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why? Because I know all of you well. You're gifted. You're talented. I mean, you could go work in a company, in a business, and excel, but you're not doing that. You're in the ministry, full-time in the ministry. You made that decision quite a few years ago, in the early years. But why? What caused you, besides some of the things already shared here, what caused you to leave this to go do this?
When I interviewed for the Boston Church, 7 months or 9, 10 months ago, they asked me what my vision for the church is. And I told them this story. I said, this story I think sums it up. When I was in about 2003 and 2004, it became really not in vogue to be in the ministry. It was, I was leading the campus ministry and the kids were sleeping around, getting drunk. and it was my Sundays would be parents lined up to tell me how messed up I was, to have expectations for these kids. My wife would come home from church crying, and my first daughter was born, and she's actually going to Northeastern University. This is not Nebraska. This is Northeastern University in downtown Boston. And she was born, and I was thinking about coming out of the ministry. I mean, I was like, this isn't what I signed up for, and this is, and most of our peers at that hour got all out of the ministry. I mean, there's not a lot of 45-year-olds in the ministry right now. And I remember at the same moment, my wife Melissa's granddad died. And his name was Richard Whitehead. And he was the elder for the Crossroads Church. And we had visited the Crossroads Church, in my early days of being married. And I had heard all these amazing stories about the Crossroads Church. But when we visited it in 2003, 2002, it was a dying church. Right. There was nobody there. It was very low attendance. The attendance there on Wednesdays was a lot different than it was on Sundays. There was no young people. You could just tell this didn't feel like, and we went down there, and of course, I went down there at the funeral, and the family's doing all the things, and I'm walking around with my daughter, my 1-year-old, in my arms. Mm-hmm. And there's all these pictures all over the walls of like all the heroes mm-hmm. and all the baptisms and all the stuff in this church that's just not there. And I remember with her in my arms thinking, if this is what this Crossroads Church looks like 30 years later, because this was 2003, and in Boston was a hot mess at the moment, and I thought, if this is what Boston looks like 20 years later, what in the world is this little girl, Emma, going to inherit 18 years from now?
That's right.
And I remember thinking, I'll go down with the ship. I will fight this thing as hard as it, and I just had this vision. We've got, I was the campus minister at the time, and I thought, who's in a better spot to affect change right now than me in that place? And we saw over the next 15 years, we saw a total revival, both nationally, but in that ministry. Mm-hmm. We sent out 50 people into the ministry over those next years, and it was just an awesome thing. But I want a spirit-filled church that my daughter and your grandchildren, but can go, this is where I can find dreams. This is where Jesus is attractive. This is where I can be best friends with other dreamers. I want people to be able to experience what I got to experience.
That's right.
That's my why.
That's right.
For us, we went to church every Sunday in our traditional church, and Marcia and I were dutiful, and we would go in, it'd be uneventful, we'd walk out, and I had spent my senior year of college, reading the Bible for about 4 or 5 months, and I remember getting nothing out of it. But I was like, there's something out there. So there's all of these little components of, is the Bible the answer? Is this tradition, religious tradition of our lives the answer? And it's just all kind of dead ending. And Marcy had written a letter to me about 3 weeks out from us getting married in June of 1991. And in that letter, she wrote, and we had no idea about discipleship, what it meant to be a disciple of Jesus. Wow. And in this letter, what was the sentence you put?
I don't even know how I wrote it, but I was just like, I pray that we can become disciples and that we can be disciples of God.
And you use the word disciples.
I used the word disciples.
Wow,
and I found the letter after we had became Christians, because I remember learning about being a disciple. I'm like, I've never heard of this before. So I just think God just was moving in my heart at that moment. And
Well, I just am like, when I did discipleship study and they said, are you a disciple? I'm like, I don't know what a disciple is. Yet my wife is writing, I pray we become disciples of Jesus. And what's interesting is, the long and short, after we started studying the Bible, it was actually Memorial Day weekend. I went to my first picnic with the church, and I studied the Bible, did the word study afterward, and I was like, the Bible is the Word of God. You know what I mean? I was like, and it was funny, after having read the Bible for 3 or 4 months, these guys are like, it's useful for teaching, correcting, rebuking, and training in righteousness. I'm like, I get it. It was like this eureka moment of the Bible is powerful. Went to church the next day, and when I walked into this church, you guys, I saw the diversity. Yep. They announced 4 baptisms. I started crying.
Wow.
And we left that service, went back to our church, the 11:30 service at our other church, and had an immediate comparison of what we'd witnessed in this amazing, diverse, enthusiastic, clear preaching worship service to what we'd been doing. And we never went back. We were baptized 2 weeks later. And I just was like, this is powerful. I still feel that way today.
I think that too. I remember even as a young girl thinking, wouldn't it be cool to have a job that you could just talk about God all the time? And I didn't think that ever existed. I didn't know there was something called the ministry,
Yeah.
I just thought that'd be a cool thing. And that was always kind of just something I thought, I don't know, God had put that on our hearts. And I remember even at a new Christians dinner, our first new Christians dinner, we went to, we're like a month old, and AT got this new Bible, and I was like, I think you're going to be speaking to a lot of people using this Bible one day. Nice. And I just think God was planting those things on our hearts.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's great.
When I was in college and high school, I mean, I did want to save the world. Like I tried to drop out of high school to join the Peace Corps, and even in college, I wanted to go move to Ireland and help, Northern Ireland, help them, free themselves from the oppression of the United Kingdom. And I wanted to, do irrigation farming in Ecuador. All these ideas of actually doing something to help the world really, really motivated me. And I wouldn't say I was in the same position where God was something that motivated me, but definitely doing something meaningful. So that when I studied the Bible, I began to see where some meaning was and where true change could happen. And for me, the ministry all of a sudden became these dreams that I had of changing the world, of going places, of affecting lasting transformative change in the world could be done through being in the ministry. Whatever that meant as a young Christian, I just knew that if I could talk with people, if I could go around the world and meet people and teach what changed me, because this saved my life.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
I remember as a young kid, 7 years old probably, we would actually wake up in the morning at 7 o'clock, and we have an altar in our house, and we would kneel down and pray with my mom. 7 o'clock, and there are times when I was sleeping, stuff like that. But I remember just God has put in my heart just the love of Jesus, and we had actually a pastor that's our neighbor, and I would sneak out and go and see their family and join them in their meals, and I was just so impacted by their lives, and I felt like growing up, there's just longing for God and knowing that there's a higher power than whatever power there is, and so actually I had. My ex-boyfriend at the time, we were so religious together. But I got tired of our hypocrisy that I left the relationship and I went to the United States. And I actually remember going through the Yellow Pages in New York looking for a church. If you don't know what Yellow Pages is, you know what Yellow Pages is?
Well, we know what Yellow Pages is.
We know.
Okay, good.
Some may not know.
So I finally found a church, and I was going to meet a pastor in a park. And it rained that day. And at the same time, a friend of mine back in high school called me up and invited me to this church. And I actually studied the Bible. Well, she studied the Bible with me. Ruby Bergens at the time, she's actually Chip Mitchell's wife.
Oh, Ruby Mitchell.
Ruby,
Yeah.
and she's amazing.
Oh,
I remember
wow.
doing discipleship study twice and light and darkness twice, and then she started like rolling her neck. I was like, I don't care how many 4 spiritual laws you bring here, that's not gonna save you. And I'm like, okay, you're right, And I remember saying, if they're right, I need to listen to them. And if I'm right, I need to teach them, But I realize they're right. So why I'm doing this? Definitely it's the love of Jesus. Definitely I feel like I could be such a driven person, but unless I feel called by God, it's nothing.
Right.
So I think I feel very called by God to do this. And I remember the same day that I was asked to be full-time, I was actually asked to be a chairman, or what do you call that? The chairperson of this international school back in the Philippines. And I remember just looking at the person and said, I'm sorry, I can't take the job. But God just made it sweeter for me to go into the ministry, that's really what I wanted. And since then, I never looked back. And
That's cool.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Okay, so let's dive into the next topic here. You all lead large churches, certainly different size, 2,000 down to like 300. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the large church roles, the big church role, leadership roles that you're like, 2021, we're coming off a pandemic, we're engaging in-person service. What do you see? What are some of the challenges before us and before you in your situation?
We're not struggling.
No challenge.
We're not struggling. Like what challenges there is? Which one do we want to talk about?
Where do we start?
Where do we
right?
start? Where do we
Yeah.
start? That's a good question.
Well, I was with the Arnesons for 14 years
Yeah.
in Chicago, and I got when my wife
Seems
and
like
I-
you've recovered really well.
Hold on.
Therapy's real.
and I love that church. You know, that will probably for the rest of my life be in the corner of my mind, my home.
Me too.
And you know, I've never lived somewhere in my life so long. I always moved around as a kid, and I was able to stay in one place for a long time, and that became my home. And the Arnesons are, my wife and I owe so much to them, to people like the Finks. We love that church. But it's funny, when we arrived there, the church was in disarray. You know, the letter had been written in 2003. We arrived in 2005. You'd go to staff meetings, and there were just undercurrents of distrust, and there was conversations going on below conversations, and that's where it was. And over the course of 14 years, my wife and I were able to see trust being built, health come back in. You'd see a staff that loved to be together, and honestly loved the Arnesons.
Wow.
You know, and I think it's unusual for someone to be in the ministry in the same place for like 25,
Yeah, that's true.
30 years,
That's unusual.
27, yeah.
27 years, and they still want them there. You know, and that's
good.
That's amazing. And so I learned so much about large church leadership in watching them. But my role there was a little bit different. Like I think AT would probably tell you that I was a pain in the butt. You know, like I liked to stir things up, and I liked to like pull the grenade and like throw it into the discussion in the middle just to see what would happen. You know, and nothing ever went fast enough for me. Nothing ever was radical enough. Nothing, you know, and I would get frustrated. And you know, in AT
And vocalize that frustration.
and I can just, the number of conversations we have, when I look back on now, sitting in the role I sit in now, I see those conversations so much differently because I didn't have to be the peacemaker then that I'm called to be now.
Right.
And the decisions that I make now, I can't be the guy that throws the grenade into the conversation. I'm trying to get people from all sorts of diverse backgrounds to live together, you know, and to love one another. And these decisions, every decision that I make, I know I'm going to hurt somebody in every single decision. And I can't do that lightly, nor can that pain be taken lightly, you know, from staffing to what direction we go to. I mean, it's everything that we do now, you know, it comes back to me. And I think when I look back at the way that the Arnesons carried themselves for that amount of time with so much peace, with a sense of it's going to be fine, and really just a belief in people. I'm amazed because in the last year and a half, I mean, I don't sleep at night. You know, I like the pain of what other people may be thinking and what's going on and what they're going through with the racial issues, with the pandemic. Like, do we wear masks at church or not? Like, when do we do that? Because
Right.
the moment I say we shouldn't wear masks at church, you know, there's going to be people that feel something from that. Legitimately, not troublemakers, but people that feel something from that. And
Yeah.
every one of those decisions creates a type of strain. And you know, there's a tortuous, you know, process that you go through in hearing all of the differing opinions. And I look back on the time that I was with 18, I would be frustrated, and I would try, and I was always pushing. And his kind of disposition with me is amazing. And so, I mean, I don't know if I'm exactly answering the question, but I think one of the things on this side of it that I go is like, wow, that the idea of being a peacemaker, still trying to do something legitimately transformative in the city that I live in, trying to baptize, trying to do something progressive, and at the same time, bring everybody along. I didn't understand what that was sitting on the other side, and I understand that much better now.
So who's throwing the grenades in your staff meetings now?
My wife, yes.
Okay, no, this is
I'd love to
awesome.
jump in.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
maybe this will be a fluid part of our conversation because, you know, when I look back, again, we didn't even know there was a ministry in the beginning. And 1 year in, Marcy and I had converted 14 people just in our neighborhood and in our first year of being Christians because of the nature of just the culture in the church at that time. And so obviously that put a little bit of a, hey, maybe this couple could be in the ministry. So a year as Christians, we were put in the ministry. And man, the insecurity, wrestling through the insecurity, I would have never thought, I never had on my radar, I want to lead the Chicago church. I mean, I'm in the Milwaukee church. I never had on my radar be in the ministry. So then I remember transitioning into Chicago and coming to those early staff meetings. Ron Drabo was leading the church at the time. And I mean, you guys, it was the most energetic, intimidating. I was like, get me through this staff meeting. Like, if you'd ever told me I'd even speak in front of the staff, I would have run out of the room. Like it's hard to fathom as a young disciple. And so, Marcy has a funny story. Like, someone would say, Marcy, you need to go initiate with Lavanya or one of the leaders in the room.
Put yourself out there and reach out and, and all I'd get up there and just be like, I like your shirt. I mean,
I relate. That's right.
Yep.
So I think.
So your name's Lavanya?
Hi, Lavanya Drabo. If you're watching, we love you guys.
I love you, Lavanya.
But, I think for us, it wasn't on our radar to be ambitious for these roles. We've literally lived, even to this day, with this sense of, this is how you change the world. Whatever mechanisms we think could shortcut the process, read John 14. Jesus, if you do this, Jesus, if you do that. And Jesus is like, no, you are my plan to change the world. And I feel like a couple of things, when we're talking about big church leadership, I don't feel like any of us are entitled to that job.
Yeah.
I think we're humbled by that job, which is, Chris, kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think the minute you think you deserve that job or a role, you're not fit for that role, personally. I think it's the person who comes into it undeserving, humbled by it. Now, my mentality is, if I'm in that role, I'm going to give it everything I have. And I'm not saying it's going to be the best that anyone could do. It's going to be the best that I can do every time, every minute that God has me in that role. And when God takes me out, then I'll know that that's the right time. But I think the other thing is, I feel like we should recognize we stand on a platform built by others before us. And all of us, Sarah Kate, when you're talking about what you endured on the planting to Manila, Philippines, that is an investment God made in you for how you feel about the church today.
That's right.
But I think for some of the young people, if God has not yet made that investment in you, it's hard to appreciate the fullness of what you have right now. And so, I look at the 30-year journey to where we are today, and it's filled with ups and downs, failures and successes. And I'm like, whoa, I stand on a platform built by somebody else, and I recognize the kind of effort, the kind of work. And so I want to honor that. 1 Corinthians 3, right? It's like someone laid a foundation, and I too am building on that foundation. So I'm humbled by this experience. 14 years in leading the Chicago church, I'm like, what an incredible honor. What an incredible privilege. So I don't know, just something you said, Chris. And I do want to say about Chris and Megan, it was really hard to lose their partnership. And as much as we joke about it, I mean, Chris is one of the most articulate, I think, gifted spiritual leaders in our fellowship in terms of how he thinks, how he approaches the investment in young people, he and Megan. And so to lose that in Chicago was very difficult. We're super proud of them being in this role in Denver and what they left behind with the Peels now leading the Southland ministry, the impact of the Testas now leading the Metro ministry in Chicago. They're now 2 region leaders because of the work the Zomans did. So anyway, I don't know what's all in that part of the conversation, Todd, but this big church leadership thing is complex, it's humbling, and it carries a legacy component to it that I want to honor.
Yeah. Along that, it makes me think about just how we need each other. And so ever since we were young Christians, we're like, we can't do this alone. We need other people in our life. We've had so many people in our life helping us. And I think we just continue to carry that because we see that is how God created the community to be in the church. And I was thinking about even, you joke about throwing the grenade in, but that partnership, that we felt in need is, I think, what we still crave. And if we don't keep that at a big level or a bigger church, it's almost like then you're just going to not have the family that you want it to be. And that's something I think AT and I have tried to just continue to have that. And even when we were asked to step into this position, 14 years ago, I remember looking at the elders and the other men and women in that room and saying, we'll do this if you do this with us. We can't do this alone. And I just think it's the team with us, the group of people with us that just, allows the challenges that are there to even feel like we can, conquer them,
So AT's been leading for 14 years. I've been leading for about 7 months. I had to think about it. And the question of what's the hardest part, about sort of building a church like this, or what's the hardest part for me in terms of the role? That's kind of what I was thinking about. But there's a laundry list of difficult things in terms of, I mean, I remember even thinking about this role and watching AT. I'm 45. Most of the senior staff is 60 or somewhere around there in Boston. We've got 14 elders. You know, it's not like leading a campus ministry. It's respectful. And I remember watching AT as he was the same age when he basically took over Chicago and learning to be a team builder, learning to respect these older men, you know, in doing it. That's one thing. There's just an avalanche that comes out. I'm amazed at the emails that you can get every day, and
So
they're all
true.
important things. You know,
Yeah.
they're all necessary things. And to what AT said, I feel I'm a product of a lot of great training. Is what I feel. You know, Randy McKean trained us for a lot of years. He's a dear friend.
Yeah.
Doug Arthur is also a close friend and has put a lot of years in, and I feel grateful for those. But probably my answer to that question is, what's the hardest thing in terms of what I have a vision for and what we want to do is, I feel like with all that goes on, it's so easy to be a manager of
Yeah,
all
that's
kinds
true.
of things. It's just so easy. If I can just get that to-do list down at the end of the day,
Right.
like that was success, but that's not. Right. Because what we need to be is catalysts. What we need to be is leaders who inspire and convert. And it's so easy once you get in certain spots. And so to me, you know, I say this, it's like Acts 15. I feel like we've been living in Acts 15 for the better part of a couple years.
Yeah.
You know, all
Yeah.
these questions, legitimate issues of in you know, social justice and race and COVID and all of these things, and we're constantly unity of the church and how we're going to do things, and it feels like we live in Acts 15 where they pulled off the mission field, kind of pulled into Jerusalem, lots of conversation, lots of process, figuring out who's going to communicate the process, going and communicating the process, and I think that's all been good, and that's definitely an uphill battle for me to learn. But man, it feels like if we live in Acts 15, like chat was one chapter of this story that they had over 30 years, and trying to lead Boston to a place where no, we're putting first things first. The gospel, it's spread, young people coming up, catalysts, and I really think Boston's on board with that idea. The senior leadership, Melissa and I feel incredibly supported, but still getting to it feels like, man, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
You know.
That's very, very true.
That's right. Well, we don't lead a big church right now, but I remember the earlier days when it was so fast, very abrupt, and yet I said it's a way of life. And next thing you know, as a young disciple, as a single woman, I again was part of another church planting. And then got married, Chester, awesome man of God, awesome, hi babies. And we were part of another 4 more church plantings, including the one in Dubai, in the Middle East, like preparing the team there. And next thing you know, we were leading about 2,500 people in 10 churches. And then it's time for us to get out of the ministry because of our son who was struggling or suffering from some health issues. And it was great. I would say the earlier days, leading a big church or a big group of people, I feel like we just needed a lot of boundaries. And I felt like, you know, there's this book, it says organize your private world. I think that's very important. I think that could be something that be pushed away because we're so busy in the name of taking care of people. We can't it's hard to take care of ourselves. So coming out of the ministry and now coming back after 10 years, we had a chance to be part of a big church, but we chose not to because we feel like after being out of the ministry for about 10 years, we feel like we want to express our faith from how it was being in a outside, the other side of the fence, which is not being in a full-time ministry. But I would say right now there is more talk about self-care. There's more talk about just more of taking care of yourself. It's like you're in an airplane. You have to put the oxygen first on yourself before you put it on somebody else, right? And I think before it's just fast. So I appreciate nowadays that I'm seeing more and more bigger churches taking care of themselves, taking care of the staff
In a healthy way.
Yeah.
in a healthy way.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's very important because something that we've learned in the past, we didn't care. We didn't have any day offs, you know? And I think the challenge I see in the bigger church right now is that to really have a paradigm shift and say it's okay to have a Sabbath on a Friday and have a day off on a Monday, you know, to take care of yourself and be filled with the Spirit because it is a spiritual position that we have.
Yes.
It's not just, you know, just run. But I could see that could be a challenge for a leader for a big church. But praise God that we're changing. There's a lot more talk about self-care. So I applaud you guys for doing it.
I'd like to. Oh,
I'm just so encouraged
Monday's
by
day off.
you know the things that you know you do for the kingdoms here, Kit. You know, serving on the women's service team, and even you and your husband, you know, serving with as regional family chair, man and woman, you know, and you know, call it Rockies.
It's a joy being with you all the time.
You know, but I love that the experience that you have all these years now builds into what you're able to be even. You know, that you've taken that, and whether you're overseeing a church of 100, 200, 300, it doesn't, or even if you're in a small church of 50, if you're in a bigger church of 2,000, I think we all want that same thing.
Yeah.
You know, we just have to remember how to keep that no matter how big things, you know, can be.
Appreciate that.
Okay, so let's open up a bigger topic here. So we're talking about leadership roles, big church leadership roles.
Yeah.
And certainly I love some of the things that were brought up. You know, my philosophy is that we're servants. Paul's pretty clear. Jesus was pretty clear. We're servants. You know, but if we're going to have a spiritual leadership, leading our flocks, leading the fellowship, you know, what's effective spiritual leadership? But then taking it maybe one step farther is that what are some of the key components of effective spiritual leadership? And I think this opens up a big topic, and we've heard some of the things, but just moving forward, I mean, things that we've certainly done, we've learned maybe by mistakes. I mean, what I tell our staff in Dallas, I want people that have made mistakes, and I want to create an environment that they can make mistakes to learn. Because usually we learn when we make mistakes.
Yeah.
Then we learn from them. And I appreciate, Chris, you shared a little bit about that, what you're seeing in your leadership, and that's how we grow.
Yeah.
Any other way, it's not going to really stick.
Yeah.
So if we're going to move forward as a fellowship, helping our churches grow, what are some of the effective spiritual leadership? What are things that we're learning that we need to share about, just personally or in our churches?
Well, can I just say something at the start of this, and I don't know if this will lead us down the right or wrong path, but I love watching Chris and Kevin right now. Having done this for 14 years, it's like cathartic to hear the struggles. I'm like, oh, you now understand what, like, I literally
That's
felt
awesome.
like, oh, that's like a drink of cool water on a hot day. Chris,
Is that why you released him? So
Chris gets it. Chris is understanding. Kevin understands. There's this sense of this is a complex,
Yeah,
difficult
it is.
thing, and I think right now in our fellowship we need a culture of trust, and trust comes when we humble ourselves with each other and toward each other, and I think, you know, there's the characterizing of the ICOC as an institution, for instance, versus a family. It's funny, when I was baptized, I didn't know there was an ICOC. I just walked into the church like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
And if we stop for a moment, not that we don't have a lot of things to change and address and develop and grow in, if we stop for a moment and go, what are we good at? Where are our strengths? How do we maximize that? One thing I know about disciples is we don't always get it right the first time, but we often get it right the second time or the third time. We're just learners. And so when you look
We're
back
willing
at the
to
history of our
change.
fellowship, it's not ignoring the
I
mistakes
totally
of the
agree.
past.
Totally agree.
And you know, it's saying,
Evolving.
yeah, hey,
Yeah.
we've learned something from that. Like you're
Evolve.
saying, Sarah Kid, it's like, you know what? Yeah, we ran hard. We redlined ourselves. We were younger then too, so getting older,
Yep,
you just
that's
can't do
right.
that and survive it. But I think right now, if we all put our mind to what's going to help build trust, now we can engage in really healthy dialogue. And I think trust is, you know, love always trusts. And I don't mean that in some succinct, easy mechanism for us getting past hard topics, but I do think that's going to take a lot of work that's worth engaging in. And I love being in a high trust environment. I couldn't wait for this talk today, guys, because I'm like, this is a group I'd love to talk to, because there's a lot of trust here.
a lot of trust.
So I don't know.
You know,
That's
I
a
think
thought.
about that and trust. And when I come to a group and there's like, we are working on our trust issues and stuff like that. I mean, my background in psychology is not psychology gives all the answer. Definitely Jesus' word gives all the answers. But I look at myself and go, why don't I trust? Why can't I trust? Or why do I have some trust issues? And I think one thing I'm learning about my leadership is really being as emotionally healthy. And I'm reading a lot about Peter Cesar's books and talking about emotionally healthy spirituality, emotionally healthy leader, emotionally healthy woman or church. And I think for me, what I'm saying about myself is when I'm not, sorry about that, if I'm not spiritually healthy or I'm not emotionally healthy, it's hard to reach a certain spiritual maturity. And I get into this drama in my own mind, and it just stops me from doing what I need to do. And I think for me personally, I feel like I need to be at the point where emotionally I'm healthy. And I'm telling you, the pandemic has brought a lot about of emotional stuff, not just for myself, but a lot of people. And it stops all of us from moving forward spiritually because of the emotions that come with whatever is inside us. So I think it's very crucial, starting for myself, to be emotionally healthy person so that I could reach that spiritual leadership that God wants me to have.
That's really great.
What else?
When I was talking to you about this earlier, but when I think about leadership, there's two movies that are my two favorite leadership movies.
These are awesome.
Yeah, and one of them, and when I was younger, it was Braveheart, and I'll come back to that. But the movie Lincoln is probably my favorite movie. It's based on A Team of Rivals, which was a book. It's an amazing book by Doris Kearns Goodwin. And the leadership is very different in these two men in this movie. You know, you got Lincoln, and then you got Braveheart, William Wallace, and they're both needed. But Lincoln the nation was coming apart, right? He was elected right at the precipice of the Civil War, and he had to bring all of these different people, all these different perspectives together, and these different perspectives had to exist together and then work together toward unity. And if you had someone there that was just a general or a dictator, it wouldn't have worked. Right? Lincoln had this amazing mix of being able to let different ideas exist. And I even think, in the ICOC, I mean, I was converted in 95, so I don't go way, way back, but there was this sort of sense that everybody needs to be just like this. Like everybody's dream needs to be to go into the ministry.
Yeah, the Blue Jackets.
Yeah, and if you don't go in the ministry,
right.
then your gift is
Khaki
not
pants.
good. But the church is filled with different gifts, and all of those gifts have to be able to exist, and all people have to feel safe to contribute, and that's got to exist. And I think good leadership, has got to be able to connect with different people and lead them. I mean, Lincoln led them. There's a few scenes in that movie where he slams the table and says, we got to do some things. I think that's part of it, but then I think the other part of it is still true. That old movie now, but it was put out the year I was converted. Braveheart, William Wallace, where they're having to go out on the front lines, and they do need soldiers who can go and fight the fight and know how to use the sword and will have courage and grit in the mission. And I do think that, we need people who are passionate about the mission to save the world, know how to use the Bible studies, and can know how to meet someone. We talk about this in my intern training programs. Like we used Philip in Acts chapter 8, right? This dude was able to get sent into Samaria, and one guy enters this one city, and it says there's joy in the city because he knew how to handle the gospel.
So cool.
And that's what we're trying to produce. Good leadership in our fellowship. We have to be able to produce people that know how to use the word and Jesus and the message of Jesus to change the world just like we used to. And that can't go away. And I think effective leadership's got to bring these two things together.
Yeah, that's
right.
well said.
So I want to add just real quick. So I think of John the Baptist. You brought those Braveheart. You brought up Lincoln. I think of John the Baptist.
I said Philip too. I had one good
Yeah. Todd's going Bible on you.
I'm
Todd.
sorry. I feel convicted right now.
So no. It's just good because I think of John the Baptist. Locusts, hair, garment, wild man, crazy. But when he was prophesied about, when Gabriel prophesied about him, he said, this guy is going to turn the hearts of the father back to the children. He's going to bring the children back to Israel, back to God. He's going to be a joy, but he was still a wild man. I mean, and he brought something to Israel to lead the way before Jesus came. And when I hear you share about, those two examples, I think it's just so important that leadership is leading us to something. And sometimes we fight. Sometimes we don't get it. Sometimes we make decisions that it does hurt people. I get that, and I appreciate that. But you still got to lead out.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's dubious task for anybody to talk about what spiritual effectiveness in big church leadership would be right now, because I think we all struggle with that. And the thing that we say now, we may regret saying 5 years from now.
Or like 10 minutes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Whenever this is over, edit that out.
Yeah, that's right.
I do think that there are some patterns in the failure of leadership over the last number of years, and I think one of them that I see is that I think with some of the people that have burned out or have been suddenly removed from leadership over the last number of years, there's some very strong patterns of a lack of self-awareness and a lack of true peer relationships that have transparency, true discipling, allowing your thoughts to be challenged. There's a lot of people that enact or initiate new ideas or new plans that really go unchallenged in our fellowship right now. And there's not a real openness between churches. And it's really easy to sit in the position of a big leader over a large church and have no one influencing you truly.
It's scary.
in
That's
your
a scary
thinking.
thing.
That is scary.
That's very
Or even like, here's my plans. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. What do you four guys who also are doing this, what do you guys think? And I think the reason why people often don't do that is because they know that there's going to be some pushback on this. And I think we used to be better at this. I think that we used to be okay with sitting and like you said, Lincoln, like in that movie, there was a tolerance for nuance. There's a tolerance for hearing different ideas and still having to decide on one, And now, I think we're so sensitive to being challenged, and we're so sensitive to having people look at our ideas and go, "No, I don't think that's going to work." I don't know. People are overwhelmed by the idea of having disagreement or having debate or having a dissonance between what they want to do. And so now you have people making decisions, and churches, they get isolated, they get off on and I think that is a pattern that you see in failure. And I think I don't exactly know what the cure for that is, because every person's got to, no one can force you to be transparent.
Can I interject real quick? So for me, it was getting fired. I mean,
Where was that, Todd?
Yeah, where was it? I didn't
Believe me, he tells me where it was.
I tease him. It was in Chicago. I mean, I was a people pleaser. I didn't realize it. I didn't know my father until I was almost 50 years old. So emotionally, just having those relationships with other men, healthy relationships, I had to grow in that, and being a father helped me in that. But I think for me, it was like Patty and I, it was really bizarre. We both lost our job exactly the same day at the exact same time.
Wow, that's crazy.
Joy of the
Crazy, And then, but being fired and then going out of the ministry and working in the world and actually doing a good job, my self-esteem grew. But then I saw my brokenness, my insecurity, my people pleasing. I was more concerned about man than I was God.
Yeah. Yep.
And then I had to purge. It had to be purged out of me.
Yeah.
And then when we were open to get back in the ministry, stupid didn't stop. They were still stupid. But then
You can't teach stupid.
Yeah.
You can't unteach it.
Yeah. But then I think because our security was in God and God's way.
Yeah.
And it was like, you know what? I can get out of the ministry again. It's about the people. It's about loving God. It's about loving people.
That's right.
And I think that purged me. And I think you're right. I think for different people it's different things. But for me, I go back to that and I think I'm so much a better leader now because I had to go through those things to mature me, to help me. And then now I can be a better leader and I can love people, and then I'm secure.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then when there's disagreements, when there's discussions, it's okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Because I love you. I love God. I want to build.
Yep. You've become emotionally healthy at that point.
Yeah, but I had to suffer.
Exactly.
I had to go through some purging.
Purge it out.
Well, I was just thinking on that point, Chris, that you were saying, I think the goal is not to be right, it's to offer our best.
Yep.
And so if I'm contributing an alternate view or a different idea, and that idea doesn't get embraced by the group, well, I've always concluded, hey, God's going to let the prevailing wisdom of my brothers and sisters and people I trust to take us forward.
Yeah.
But I said something to Chris and Kevin when we were sitting in the other room. I hope this isn't controversial, but
Oh, I hope it is.
I hope it is.
I do too.
I get concerned because there's a lot of voices calling for change in the church, but that's not translated. But the driving forces of that is not so that we can be better equipped to change the world.
Yeah.
It's like we're trying to change the church to change the church. But I don't hear the secondary thought of so that we can change the world.
Amen.
And I think it's
Sorry,
intense to
happened.
think about where God will take us in this incredible journey. And if we lose sight of that, I mean, the church is going to need to, every person we add to the church means the church needs to change to be more like Jesus. We're on that journey for the rest of our lives, but
Right.
that can't be the end game here.
Right.
The end game has to be changing the world.
Yeah.
And man, I look out at the world right now and I'm like, Jesus is the only way.
That's right.
I mean, proclaiming Jesus, cut through everything and lift up our resurrected Lord and point to him and say, I believe. You know what I mean? I just am like, and Kevin, your Braveheart analogy, it's like, where's the, when Kevin speaks, his voice starts going. I'm like, how loud could Kevin get? And if you ever get Chip and
I'm
Kevin in a
actually
room,
the quiet one in my family. I am.
Oh, scary,
Where I
huh?
come from. You know, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
When I think of spiritual leadership and I think of those two words together, the first thing that kind of I start thinking about is, okay, leadership, how do you lead? But really the thing that I feel like God has put on my heart is the spiritual. Like, is this a spiritual, leading?
Yeah.
Because we probably all are very hardworking. And I think our churches are filled with amazing leaders. And I think filled with amazing members that just serve
incredible.
God and serve one another. And I think what I see where God just does these miracles is when we are spiritual.
That's right.
And I think he's saying, stay near to me, be spiritual. And I love what you're saying, you guys are saying, just listening to one another and being curious to understand what's going on in one another's minds and letting that then become what is going to make up the body versus feeling like it has to just be something that comes from within me or something. It comes to me, I feel like that's something God's teaching me is how to listen better, how to draw out other people who have incredible insights, to bring that out and then lift all of that up to God and see what he's going to do with it. And then it's amazing what he does. I mean, we saw miracle after miracle in times like that. When we planted the church in Columbus, Ohio, we just had these miracles that would happen that we can't even explain, but it was just going in faith. And I think, when we continue to do it in faith, and one of my favorite books in the Bible is Galatians, and he says the greatest thing is faith expressing itself in love, and I just think that's a way that I hope, we can continue to lead.
I thought she was going to go with Galatians 5:19.
There it is.
22 is better. 22 is better.
Your wife.
There's a lot of good ones in there.
It's amazing how I think if we're not in a ministry, I mean, I think of you guys, you're such a driven person. I think you will make an impact no matter what, whether you're inside or outside the ministry. And I think I like what you're saying about spiritual. When times are hard in my leadership, it's so easy to just, have self-pity and, feel bad about myself or get discouraged. And I think I go back to I am called by God, regardless of who I am.
really
I'm
right,
called by God, totally. And I think, and also going back to this is a spiritual position because it's so easy to drive, unless I have that spiritual mindset that God has put me here. It's tough to be in leadership, and it's tough to lead leaders. And I think that could be a challenge to lead leaders. But I think if you feel like you're put there, I remember Chester and I just got married, and after a month, we were actually sent to a sector that's 450 people, and the leaders back then were evangelists and women's ministry leader, and one of the members said, "Oh, we're gonna be led by Chester and Circuit. I think we're being demoted because they're not evangelists and women's ministry. We just got married 2 months." And I remember not being faced by it. I felt like, who cares if I have the title or not, And
right.
I think I think when we get messed up with that word leadership, then we get messed up. And I think you just do what God has asked you to do and just move forward. I think that for me keeps me grounded. And not to be messed up with the title. And then again, it goes back to just, I'm almost 60 years old, and being in the ministry for over 20 years, I feel like I need to evolve constantly, especially emotionally, because I go through the phases in my life, menopause, and whatever it is. I had COVID, and again, I'm foggy right now. Every once in a while, I get foggy, and I'm like, I need to just accept who I am today and accept my limitations and still move forward, and God is working through me. So I think that is like one thing that I see what my leadership should be, constantly evolving and understanding that God's behind me, just move forward.
Amen.
Yeah. I think of in this room here, we lead good-sized ministries, some bigger than others, but there's so many different layers. You have your staff, you have your eldership. For those who, I think all of us have eldership except for Colorado Springs.
No.
You have a board, then you have your lay leaders, and then you're trying to raise up,
Yep.
the next generation or the millennials and the different levels like that. So what's that like in the sense of what are some of the key components, would you say, helping lead such a diverse group? And I'm just talking about roles. I'm not talking about, diversity and ethnic background, sex background. I mean, just leading on that. What are some of the things that you feel like these are things that you're learning how to help you, besides what we've already talked about? Like communication comes to my mind. Learning how to communicate with different people. I mean, I like to communicate this way, but very few people hear this way. They hear so many different ways, and I've got to learn to adapt to.
I shout at people. It's
Yeah, that works. That works.
Just raise the volume, and it
right,
gets everybody's attention.
So what's it like, though?
Do you hear the words coming out of my mouth?
I'm thinking of the word inclusion. I think we should all feel like we're included in this vision for what we're building. And Marcia and I were talking the other day. I think the trick with the pandemic is people who are very included in the effort to build the church. It could be Kids Kingdom, it could be ushering. Like you were there, you were doing something, small group leadership, and all of these things that are so important and crucial to the church. I remember when I was first asked to be an usher, I was like, I get to walk around during church. This is incredible. I like to sit at church was just like, let's do something, And then I got to count the contribution. I'm like, I'm counting the Lord's money.
That's right.
And it's very special. But, we've just gone 14 months watching screens. And I'm like, the effort to bring inclusion and this sense of investment back to the church. And I pray that soon we're in person in every facet we can be. But that's gonna be a challenge. And so when you talk about the complexity of the church, it's like our boards are functioning. I love, all of the functioning components of the Chicago church, but keeping everybody kind of together in this thing with a common vision, it's challenging. I think the pandemic has added to the complexity of it.
Well, and that's partly what I think my role is, right, is bringing a lot of this diversity into a vision, right? And I'm the vision setter, but when I'm pretty secure in who I am, but I know what I am and what I'm not. Like there's a brother, he's an evangelist, elder, and teacher in our staff named Mike Van Auken, and he's kind of he's got like 3 brains. He's graduate school at Stanford with his MBA,
Nice.
and if we're gonna talk, he and I, about the finances of the church, one of us has got a lot of expertise, and then one of us is sort of learning, and he's amazing. It's my role. He's gifted. I mean, he's an evangelist. He's a church builder. But man, he helps so much in that area. So I feel like my role is to be a maestro. All right, Val Koha helps us with Europe, with the EMS, and it's an amazing organization, the European Mission Society. Val's, from Estonia, grew up in Germany. He's an amazing disciple, but he's got an expertise and a passion and a giftedness that I can't match. I don't even want to. I've got my stuff, but letting him come on to do what he's doing, and the teachers and all the different facets. And I think regionally it's the same. And I think in a campus ministry it's the same. If you're gonna get things really growing, you got to find out what people are good at, and then bring them into God's vision and let them
really
run
good.
with it.
Yeah.
That's great.
Is one of the things I think.
Yeah.
Amen. Thank you.
awesome. How big is your church now?
2,200 and something.
Wow.
I think, we came into Denver about a year and a half ago. We were there for about 5 months, and then it went into COVID.
Lockdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
challenging.
and what was interesting is that in 5 months we got to know a certain part of the membership, and then we were barred from knowing anything else after that because it was in lockdown. But they got to see us because we're videoing from I made so many videos, and they're videoing from our house. They're seeing our
I like your
kids.
dual videos.
Yeah,
Where Chris
exactly.
is talking to Chris.
That's right.
And so people get to know you, and I'm trying to figure out what should the vision for the church be. And I don't really know the church yet. I don't feel comfortable going, this is the direction we need to go, because I want to know the city more. I
that's
want to know
right.
that. I don't want to have haste in that. But in all of it, I feel like the thing that we've got to be able to maintain in a larger church, and I'm in a different situation than AT and Kevin. Their churches are substantially larger. So there's like another level that they have to go through. But there has to be this sense of connection between people and between ministers, and that there's not a disconnect there, and that the church still feels as though we are a family together.
Yeah.
And that we're still trying to change the world. We're not ignoring what's going on outside. That
Absolutely.
People feel like this is a place where I am cared for. This is a place where where if I say something, there's someone listening to me. I'm all the kind of verbiage of I'm seen and I'm heard. And then at the same time, pushing it forward. And I just sometimes think the only way to maintain your vision, to maintain momentum, is that there is a connection between people. Because when there's connection, everything's easier.
Yeah.
Conflict conversations are easier. Coming up with a radical idea that's gonna push people in a new way. When people trust you and there's connection, they'll go, well, this is gonna be hard, but we know who's doing this.
Yeah.
And so we know the people that are involved and who are making this decision. And so I'm on board. Even though I don't totally understand it, I'm on board. And I think part of the challenge of larger churches is maintaining that. When you're in small churches, those are beautiful. Like when leading the DeKalb church outside of Chicago was one of my favorite times, because you know everybody. And if you want to do something, it's a matter of 15 phone calls and you got it all. Everyone's communicated to. Everyone's been heard, and it's easy to do some tough things. It's easy to make some tough decisions.
Yeah.
But in a larger church, that those tough decisions, which affect everyone at every single level, that only happens in a healthy way when there is a sense of connection with everybody. And so I feel like that's one of the skill sets that a large church leader's got to have, is the ability to realize when there is healthy connection within the church, and the ability to create it. Because in every room that I walk in, I want to know everybody's name, and I want to, and that may not be realistic at certain levels, but I certainly...
He's a people pleaser in a measure. Always has been.
So I see what you're saying about there's a degree of easiness or difficulty when you're in a small church compared to a bigger church. But I know for ourselves, when we chose to have a smaller church, Jess and I were thinking, how does it feel? Like, people are asking, how does it feel to lead a small church? And we're like, well, honestly, in some ways it's harder. It has its perks to be in a big church and in a small church, but I think in the beginning, you're it. If you don't have staff, you're it. You don't have elders, you're it, And I think for us, my husband and I, we've really told ourselves it doesn't matter how big we lead, we want to still be leading a family group. So we're leading a family group. Doesn't matter what the size of our ministry is. And I think when we accepted this position, we just told them we refuse to lead the church on our own. We want this to be a cooperative, concerted effort. And the layers that you're talking about in the beginning, it's just we're into everything. And then you, of course, you raise up people and empower people and stuff like that. I like what you said about knowing what we can do and knowing what we cannot do, because there's a lot of people out there that have been disciples for 40 years, 30 years. They know what we cannot do as leaders. And I think it's good to empower the people to do what they can do and let them express their own faith. And we don't have eldership, but we have a functioning group that help us in shepherding ourselves. So I think that is great for us. It works for us. But I would say we are curious to find out what's out there after the pandemic, and I'm sure there's going to be people who are wounded. There's some people that are gone. There's some people that are limping. But then again, people are looking at us and say, what are you going to do now? Just look up to God and,
Yeah, I think too, in all these different tiers that we're talking about, that if there's, and the clear communication is something we've really had to figure out at this level.
Yeah.
And knowing how to make sure that each group understands what the process is. And that's something we've really, you hear the word process a lot in Chicago. But we're like, what's the process? And we're really trying to, because what I think that does is it ends up bringing security to everybody because they understand, oh, that's how that decision got made. That's how that then gets, that's how that happens. Because if you're going to, want change in one area, put it through the process, and then we can all be on the same page together. And it takes the thing about it.
The process of AT going in a room by himself.
The process of AT going in a room and being like, but
Spin the tail. Pin the tail on the dog.
it
Spin around
does
today.
take more time.
That's right.
I.e., Chris's frustration.
I.e. my joy.
Communication is
But
very important.
it's so, and so I think that process has been something that, whatever it is for whatever size group or whatever you're in, if it's clear and people understand it, you get a lot more done. And it eventually starts becoming quicker because everyone understands, oh, we just got to go through the process, if that makes sense.
It's the worst feeling when someone goes, so how did that decision get made? And then you're trying to remember.
I just decided it today.
An email went out?
I think we talked about it, right?
So let's do this. Closing thoughts. So roughly in a year from now, many of us are going to be in Orlando for the ILC.
Let's go.
ICMC, singles, we got Stronger, different conferences strung out over like a 10, 11-day period. But for those of us who serve in leadership, whether or not it's elders, teachers, evangelists, ministry, men, women, next 12 months, where do you see? What do you see?
12 months?
In the 12 months, next 12 months, going into the conference. What?
I think in 2012 when we had the first World Summit, I think one of the things that just was so inspiring is you felt like people fell in love with our church all over again.
Yeah.
You saw people speaking, you saw all the countries represented. I mean, it was so amazing. It's almost like people woke up and went, oh yeah, that's right. That's why I love this place.
Yeah.
And I think we've been through a year and a half where people have that love has been called into question again. And there has been some necessary critique of the church, and there's been some unfair critique of the church, and then we've been separated, and there's been a lot of suspicion of one another because we've been isolated. And I hope over the next 12 months, as a leadership, as in the sacrifices that every disciple makes, that we can get every disciple to fall back in love with the church again, to become this fellowship's, the kingdom's greatest defenders again. So that when we come together, it is such a joyful reunion. And people wake up again and remember, like, this is why I've given 20 years of my life to this. This wasn't in vain. This has not been lost time. There are going to be ups and downs, but this is worth it. Being here is worth it. So over the next 12 months, my prayer is that we get to that point again.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the right answer or the wrong answer or
We'll let you know.
the deep answer. He says it a lot better than I do. When I'm thinking about Boston, and I think that's what you're asking me. I don't know, maybe you're not, but here it goes.
Both.
There we go. I don't think we can be healthy as a people if we don't have a flood of Gentiles, just broken people that found Jesus coming on into our numbers. I just don't. I actually think, there was a time when we led campus ministry, and campus ministers would find me at the ICMC, and when we were a huge, Boston church, we had a ton of Kingdom kids, and people would say, you can't build a campus ministry with Kingdom kids. I never said that. But it was a felt thing, because it was like, and in Boston, we actually shifted it all around. I mean, these Kingdom kids kind of gave themselves to Petruzzi and me, and we were just this radical bunch, and we saw, tons of conversions. And when all the conversions came in, and there was this Gentile Kingdom kid, sort of Jew-Gentile mix, it was healthy, right? It was sort of exactly, and that's what I want. I want to see, we've been in COVID and we're coming out, and I want to build momentum and just see a flood of souls just coming, because I think it actually hits at what he's talking about, which is, the first love. How do you remember your first love if you don't have a bunch of people that have been here for 3 months, just going, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen.
That's exactly right.
And you're sitting, this is amazing. Did you hear that sermon? And you're sitting next to someone that's going, I hated it. But that person's going, I hated it. He's going to go, but you loved it. And I just think there's something about that. And the Bible talks about it. I think it's like the book of Ephesians, and the Jew and the Gentile coming together to sort of bring the mystery that God had and fulfill it. And that's what I feel like my role is, right? I've got to figure it out so that we can build momentum where in each region of the Boss Church, people feel like, there's a lot of people and a lot of young people that are new and fresh, and they're just going, what happened in your church over the last 20 years? I don't know. I've been here for like 10 minutes and like, Jesus just saved my soul, and it's just, if we don't get enough of those, I think we're going to be in trouble.
Yep, I agree.
It's funny, in our little, we have a little zone of 55 back home, and we've had a number of guests come for the first time, and they're having that expression. They're like, I've never seen anything like this. And I'm like,
really?
Right now? Exactly. Like we call it the holy gazebo. We meet under the holy gazebo outdoor, and it's kind of this. It's like 50 of us, and a number of people have just been like, this is incredible. But I think you're right, and remarkably articulate, Kevin. That was great. Compared to Chris.
So good.
Remarkable.
It was so good. And I said remarkably wrong.
That was good.
But here's what I would add to this. I love what you guys are saying. I think this idea of letting ourselves fall in love with the fellowship, seeing the work of Jesus, and I agree, it's this flood of new disciples and basking in the glory of, it reminds us of our own baptism, right? Like, that was special. And I also think we're in a generational shift in the church. And I'll brag about Marcy a little bit. Marcy was a 3-time state champ in high school on the 4x800 meter relay.
Wow!
And we've done a lot of talking about
That's
that
awesome.
baton pass. And what I hope that we see, that literally on the stage, in the fellowship, is this generational humility. I don't think we need to be saying things like, these guys need to get out of the way and these guys need to be given this. I think we've got to refrain from that kind of harsh language and show the baton pass. If you hold on to it too long, you mess up the race. If you don't grab a hold of it and run your part of the race, and I think then you mess up the race. Yeah, you drop it and you're in trouble altogether. You're just disqualified. But I just think, I hope in a year we're celebrating
That's awesome.
this, because the pioneers of our wonderful fellowship are now retiring, and there's many next generation people coming up. I just love watching the Zillmans and the Millers assume these roles. I mean, these are not next gen guys, but it's really important that they assume this leadership position. Marcy has an analogy, just once the baton is passed, this idea of we're still in the race.
Yeah, once you pass the baton, if you've ever run a relay before, it's not like you just walk and go to the concession stand and get a hot dog. I mean, you're cheering the rest of the team on, you know what I mean?
You're running across the infield.
Yeah, you're just, because that's your team, and we're all in it. So wherever you're at in that, we're all still needed, you know?
I love that idea.
I like the word love, and I also like the word confirmation. I think 12 months from now, it's confirmed we're on the right track. Now, we can be messed up, and we're just family, and family's messy, right? And I think we've been here before, and I believe that true disciples cannot be scared with anything. I think you can't scare off a real disciple. So I think 12 months from now, you'll see who's there and who's not. And I think it's a confirmation that as long as we stick together and be family and stick with God, that'll be a joyful noise that we're going to have, 12 months from now.
Will.
So it's a confirmation we're on the right track. We could tweak a little bit and change some, and evolve as the time goes on. But at the same time, it's a confirmation we're on the right track. We're in Jesus' family, and that's important.
Amen. Well, for me, this was truly a special, as an honor for me to sit with you guys, to talk, to dream. I know Will wanted to be here, but he couldn't, and so, just spending time and hearing your hearts, it was a joy for me, and I'm grateful. And so I'm looking forward to 12 months of building 12 months of preparing,
Yeah.
working the soil. And because we do want to grow, but we want to grow God's way, not our way. And we
right.
certainly want to be in step with the Spirit. And I feel like in this conversation, I feel like it was very Spirit-led. In the sense of where does God want to take us, and so it was an honor. So thank you.
Thanks for inviting
Thank
us.
you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. And
Thanks
so,
for keeping
and
us on
for all
track.
those who are listening, we're grateful for your participation, and we're certainly looking forward to more episodes. Future of Faith. My co-host Will and I, we're going to be dreaming and talking about other episodes that we can put together and to really help build as we go into 2022. We love you and looking forward to the future together.
Awesome.
All right, that's a cut.
All right, guys.
Boom.
Thank you.
Good job.
Guys,
Nice job.
thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Oh, stay
Job
put,
time.
stay put, stay put.
Stay put.
Oh.